You will never be fully understood, not by your partner, not by your parents, not by your closest friend. Even the person who has known you for decades, who has seen you at your best and your worst, who claims to know you better than anyone else, is still only experiencing a version of you that exists solely in their mind. This isn't a pessimistic view or a cynical one. It's simply the fundamental reality of human consciousness. Your experience of existence is radically private. The way you perceive colors, the exact quality of your emotions, the precise nature of your thoughts. These experiences are locked within the confines of your mind. You can describe them, you can try to externalize them through art or conversation, but they remain fundamentally untransferable. Now, we're about to explore this uncomfortable truth. At your core, you are fundamentally alone. Your consciousness is an island that no bridge can fully connect to any other. But this isolation isn't merely a curse. It could be the key to your ultimate strength. The philosophers who have faced this reality didn't end up in despair, but arrived at a deeper understanding of what it means to be human and how to find meaning within this unavoidable solitude. This isn't a comforting exploration. It's a confrontation with one of the darkest and most profound aspects of human existence. Yet understanding it might be the most liberating thing you ever do. Schopenhauer, regarding the isolation of consciousness, Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, grasped this isolation better than most. He described life as a tragic illusion, precisely because we are fundamentally alone in our suffering, while believing we can be fully known and understood by others. Schopenhauer observed that each person is confined within their own consciousness. Your entire experience of reality, every sight, sound, emotion, and thought, takes place within the theater of your mind. No matter how eloquently you describe your inner experience, you can never convey the raw sensation of it to another person. Take a simple example, the color blue. You and I might both agree that the sky is blue, but I have no way of knowing if your subjective experience of blueness matches mine. Perhaps what I call blue would appear as what you call green, if I could somehow see through your eyes. We use the same words, but our inner experiences remain private and potentially quite different. This becomes even clearer when dealing with complex emotions or ideas. Recall a time when you tried to explain something deeply important to you, a belief, a feeling, an insight, and saw blank incomprehension on someone else's face. You used all the right words. You crafted perfect analogies, but still, they didn't truly grasp it. This isn't a failure of communication skills. It's an encounter with the limits of shared understanding. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." This wasn't mere philosophical posturing. It was a recognition that our attempts to escape our fundamental isolation often lead to greater suffering. We see this in everyday life. People misunderstand your intentions no matter how clearly you state them. They project their own fears and desires onto your words and actions. They respond not to you, but to the version of you that exists in their mind. This isn't because they're deliberately misinterpreting you. It's because direct access to another consciousness is impossible. Schopenhauer's insight wasn't that we should despair over this isolation, but that we should see it as the starting point for authentic living. Only by acknowledging the fundamentally private nature of experience can we begin to build meaningful bridges between our isolated consciousnesses. Nietzsche embraced the abyss, or be devoured by it. Friedrich Nietzsche took this understanding of fundamental isolation and pushed it further. He recognized that this solitude terrifies most people, driving them to seek refuge in the false comfort of the crowd. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, "No shepherd and one herd, everyone wants the same. Everyone is the same. Whoever feels different goes voluntarily into the madhouse." This wasn't merely social commentary. It was an observation about how humans react to the terror of existential isolation. Most people, rather than facing the abyss of their own consciousness, choose to lose themselves in group identity. They adopt pre-existing values, beliefs, and lifestyles. They find comfort in conformity because it creates the illusion that they are not alone, that their inner experience is shared by others in exactly the same way. The fear of isolation is so strong that people will abandon their own perceptions and insights, rather than stand apart from the group. They will deny their own experience of reality to preserve the comforting fiction of perfect understanding and belonging. This is what Nietzsche called the spirit of gravity, the force that drags us down into conventional thinking instead of allowing us to rise with our own unique perspective. But Nietzsche saw an alternative path. Rather than being consumed by the abyss of solitude, we can embrace it. The person who accepts their fundamental isolation gains something valuable: intellectual independence. When you no longer need others to validate your perspective, you become free to see reality as it appears to you, not as others insist it must be. This is why Nietzsche praised the free spirit, the person who can stand alone with their perceptions and insights, who doesn't require constant reinforcement from group agreement. This stance isn't comfortable. It often leads to literal solitude, as others distance themselves from someone who refuses to conform to expected patterns of thought, but it leads to authentic understanding. The truly powerful individual in Nietzsche's view isn't the one who conquers others or amasses social status. It's the one who overcomes the fear of isolation and becomes self-sufficient in their thinking. This isn't arrogance or stubbornness. It's the courage to exist authentically in a world that demands conformity as the price of belonging. Carl Jung, The Shadow of Solitude. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, understood that most people fear solitude because it forces them to confront themselves, including all the aspects of the self they prefer to ignore. Jung observed that modern life offers countless ways to avoid being truly alone with our thoughts. Even before the era of smartphones and social media, humans were adept at creating distractions to escape self-awareness. The fear behind this avoidance isn't just the fear of loneliness. It's the fear of what we might uncover about ourselves in true solitude. This is why Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself, or from holding certain views that others find inadmissible." The most painful aspect of isolation isn't physical separation from others. It's the realization that your inner world remains fundamentally private. Jung believed that facing this solitude was essential for what he termed individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated person. When we avoid solitude, we evade confronting the shadow aspects of ourselves, the parts we've rejected, suppressed, or denied. Without this confrontation, we stay fragmented, projecting our disowned traits onto others instead of integrating them into a complete self. Want to understand more about confronting your own existence? Hit subscribe now to continue your philosophical journey. This explains why some of history's greatest minds, artists, philosophers, scientists, and spiritual leaders, actively sought solitude. They weren't antisocial or misanthropic. They understood that certain kinds of insight are only accessible when we step away from the constant social feedback loop and directly face the contents of our own consciousness. Consider how many breakthrough insights emerged during periods of isolation. Nietzsche wrote his most profound works while living alone in the Swiss Alps. Einstein developed the theory of relativity during solitary walks. Martin Luther King Jr. formulated his most powerful ideas in the solitude of a Birmingham jail cell. These weren't mere coincidences. They demonstrated the clarifying power of confronting one's thoughts without the distorting influence of constant social interaction. Jung didn't advocate for permanent isolation. He recognized humans as fundamentally social beings, but he insisted that periodic, meaningful solitude was crucial for genuine self-knowledge and, paradoxically, for authentic connection with others. Only the person who truly knows themselves can offer genuine presence to another, rather than projecting fantasies and unmet needs onto them. The illusion of connection, why most relationships are surface level. The painful reality is that most human connections are far shallower than we pretend they are. This isn't because people are insincere or uncaring. It's due to the fundamental limitations of interpersonal understanding. We bond primarily through shared experiences and common language, but these create the illusion of a deeper connection than what truly exists. Two people watching the same film, cheering for the same team, or even living through the same crisis are still having fundamentally private experiences. The sharing is real, but restricted to external circumstances, not the internal processing of those events. Language itself, our primary tool for connection, is woefully inadequate for conveying subjective experience. The words "I'm sad" can describe a vast range of internal states, from mild disappointment to soul-crushing despair. When I tell you I'm sad, you interpret it through your own experience of sadness, which may be radically different from mine. We think we've connected, but we've only approximated understanding. Most relationships are built not on deep understanding, but on convenience, compatibility, and mutual benefit. This isn't cynical, it's realistic. The people in your life respond mainly to the aspects of you that align with their needs and experiences. Your colleague relates to your professional skills, but may have no idea about your spiritual life. Your drinking buddy connects with your social self, but may never see your intellectual depth. Even in intimate relationships, this pattern persists. Partners develop shortcuts and approximations for understanding each other. They learn which external signals match certain internal states. When she tilts her head that way, she's skeptical. When his voice takes on that tone, he's hiding something. These are useful tools for navigating relationships, but they aren't the same as direct access to another's consciousness. This explains why people married for decades can still profoundly surprise or disappoint each other. It explains why you can suddenly feel completely alone in a room full of friends. It explains why, even as you're nodding along to someone's story, you're thinking, "You don't really get it." The fear of facing this reality drives people to settle for surface-level connections rather than confronting the fundamental isolation of consciousness. They pile up social interactions that give the feeling of being known without the depth of it. Social media amplifies this dynamic, providing countless shallow connections that disguise themselves as meaningful relationships. The power of embracing your loneliness. So far, this exploration might seem bleak. If we're fundamentally isolated in our consciousness, if complete understanding is impossible, if most connections are shallower than we pretend, what hope is there for meaningful human existence? The answer lies in a paradox. You cannot truly connect with others until you are whole on your own. The person who cannot bear to be alone will never bring their authentic self to relationships. They will bring their needs, their fears, their desperate desire to escape isolation. They will use others as distractions from self-awareness rather than engaging in genuine exchange. The strongest people aren't those who never feel loneliness. They are those who have mastered their relationship with solitude. They have faced the abyss of their own consciousness and found it not only terrifying, but also rich with possibility. They've discovered that being alone with one's thoughts isn't a punishment, but an opportunity. This mastery doesn't happen by chance. Most people actively avoid confronting their fundamental isolation. They fill every moment with noise, literal noise from television or music, social noise from constant interaction, or the noise of busyness that keeps reflection at bay. They reach for their phone the moment solitude threatens to overwhelm them. They keep conversations superficial to avoid the discomfort of facing the limits of shared understanding. The alternative demands courage. It means deliberately stepping away from distractions and allowing yourself to feel the full weight of your isolated consciousness. It means sitting with the uncomfortable realization that some aspects of your experience will never be fully communicated to or understood by another person. It means building a relationship with yourself that doesn't rely on external validation. This path leads to genuine strength, not the fragile strength of someone who needs constant reinforcement, but the resilient strength of someone who can stand alone when needed. The person who has mastered solitude doesn't fear being misunderstood or rejected because they no longer require perfect understanding or universal acceptance. Paradoxically, this self-sufficiency opens the door to more authentic connections with others. When you no longer need others to complete you or validate your reality, you can engage with them from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. You can listen to their perspective without feeling threatened by its difference from yours. You can offer your truth without demanding their agreement. This is why the philosophers we've discussed didn't end in nihilistic despair despite recognizing the fundamental isolation of consciousness. They discovered that facing this truth didn't lead to permanent loneliness, but to a more authentic way of being with both oneself and others. Strength through solitude. You came into this world alone, and you will leave it alone. Between those moments, you will experience countless connections with others, some fleeting, some lasting, some shallow, some deep. But through it all, your consciousness remains your own, an island in the archipelago of humanity. The sooner you embrace this truth, the sooner you free yourself from the desperate need for perfect understanding and belonging that keeps most people trapped in patterns of dependency and inauthenticity. This isn't about rejecting connection. It's about approaching it from a place of self-sufficiency rather than desperate need. The ultimate question isn't whether you'll experience loneliness. You will. It's whether that loneliness will be a destructive force that pushes you into false connections and self-abandonment, or whether it will be the forge that shapes you into someone who can stand firmly in their own perception of reality while still reaching authentically toward others. Will you continue distracting yourself from the fundamental privacy of consciousness? Will you keep settling for surface-level connections that never quite reach the core of who you are? Or will you have the courage to face the abyss of solitude and discover that within it lies not only darkness, but also the possibility of genuine strength? Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Jung didn't offer comforting platitudes about human connection. They provided something more valuable, the truth about our existential condition and a path toward authentic living within it. The dark truth about human existence isn't that we're alone. It's that we refuse to acknowledge our aloneness and thus never develop the strength that comes from confronting it. You cannot escape the fundamental isolation of consciousness, but you can transform it from a prison into a fortress. The choice is yours.